Alright, so. Kia ora e whānau, ko Nicolena toko ingoa, ko Wairere toko awa, ko Kai Mai Rangers, toku maunga, ko Whakatiwai, to whare nui, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi. Tēnā koutou, and thank you for coming to my talk about the impact of takiwātanga on autistic pride in Aotearoa New Zealand. As someone who constantly goes on about nothing about us without us in the disability world, it's ironic that I'm here now as a Pākehā talking about Māori philosophies. I want to make it clear that I'm autistic, I am not Māori. While it's best to learn directly from Māori, it is on matters related to them. This talk uses publicly available information I have learned through living in Aotearoa New Zealand, doing my Masters in Māori and Pacific Development, and PhD in Education, and listening to people talk about how these concepts relate to them. A bit about me. I am a Pākehā descendant of British colonisers who came to Aotearoa to build schools in the 1860s on my father's side. On my mother's side, we are Dutch. She immigrated from Aotearoa New Zealand, sorry, my translation, in the 1970s. Pākehā is the word for New Zealand Europeans. This is my first time on the European continent. I was thrilled to find an opportunity to come to Neurodiversity Pride Week and explore my neurodivergent identity alongside my ancestral identity. It seems right that when coming halfway around the world to learn about something that started in the Netherlands, i.e. the Neurodiversity Pride Week, I should bring knowledge about something that started in Aotearoa New Zealand. This is going to be about takiwātanga, a te reo Māori word for what non-Māori would term autism. Te reo is the Māori language. I need to further preface this talk by saying that Māori are the indigenous peoples of Aotearoa New Zealand. The term Māori encompasses many whānau, which is extended families, hapu, which are sub-tribes, and iwi, which are tribes, or more accurately translated as nations, who each have different stories, language variations, and customs. This talk will rely on generalisations about Māori for the purposes of an introduction. Before we learn about how Māori relate to autism through takiwātanga, I have found it useful to first recall the Western ways of thinking about autism that have dominated my own culture. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, families and communities incorporated different types of people into their locally based agrarian and small-scale economies. There was no specific concept of disability until the Industrial Revolution pushed people away from their self-determined rhythms of production and into less accessible waged labour in less accessible buildings, in less accessible cities. At the same time, medical institutions began forming to house disabled people away from our communities, so non-disabled people could continue working outside the home, unencumbered by care responsibilities. Impairments were named to justify segregation, and efforts to isolate or cure got underway. The medical model of disability was born, bolstered by political, media, and faith-based messaging about the perceived undesirability of different brains and bodies. The key takeaway I want to focus on here is that the medical model of disability began during the Industrial Revolution in England. It hasn't always been this way. The idea of autism spectrum disorder and the medical model of disability from which the concept of diagnosis arises has a clear beginning and can change if we choose to walk away from or overthrow it. Back to the Industrial Revolution. Aside from changes in social relations, rapid growth and urbanisation also created conditions under which the colonisation of faraway lands became more appealing. Having come up with the medical model of disability, British started bringing those ideas out with them to Aotearoa from the early 1800s onwards, which is now called New Zealand. Disability, like class and race, was a foreign concept to Māori. Prior to colonisation, there was no equivalent notion of disability in Māori society. Instead, Māori social structure was based on whakapapa, meaning genealogy or lineage, rather than capitalism. A person's position in society was organised through birth order, kinship, roles and ancestral connections, rather than any differences they may have. It is British who brought social structures based on work, merit and print literacy to Aotearoa, while organising those arrangements in ways that exclude disabled people. Contrasting bodily or neurological differences as negative thing, over in Aotearoa, many pūrākau, which are myths or stories, are about atua, meaning gods or ancestors, with features that we might now recognise as forms of disablement. Because of this, Māori with such features are often seen as possessing a gifting of greatness. Māori and others using a bicultural approach now use pūrākau to reframe disability and neurodiversity. So I couldn't find photos of all of them because, images, because obviously they're mythological creatures. This is actually the most famous character in pūrākau, Maui. You might have even heard of him. But his wife, Hina. All these people are kapo, which is what Pākehā would describe as blind. This is Muriranga Whenua, and this is Mahuika, which is the goddess of fire. She is also kapo, so she's what we would call blind. So it shows how normal it was to have what we would call disability in pre-colonial society. A Māori perspective uses cultural and spiritually significant narratives to challenge the stigma associated with neurodivergence. This benefits neurodivergent people and promotes interest in neurodivergence in the wider society. Just say if I'm talking too fast or too slow or it needs to be different. Okay. A Māori perspective, one such conceptualisation was authored by ADHD Dr. Byron Rangiwai, which is this guy. He compares ADHD to the way of the piwakawaka, a native bird that flicks its wings and quickly changes direction. As Rangiwai said, the piwakawaka characteristics, including its quick movements, curiosity and ability to adapt to changing environments, mirror certain aspects of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is a screenshot from Neuroaffirming from an article kind of summarising Rangiwai's work on neuroaffirming futures, but I could just read out. So they've got the piwakawaka characteristics, and there's more, but I've screenshot this. Then they've matched those up with ADHD strengths and matched them up with the DSM criteria. So for example, the piwakawaka are mischievous and cheeky, natured birth. So he's matched that up with the ADHD strength of imaginative and innovative spirit, bringing enthusiasm, humour and novel perspectives to their interactions and endeavours. Whereas the medical model might say something about the same person, like lacks ability to complete schoolwork and other assignments or to follow instructions, or avoids or is disinclined to begin homework activities requiring concentration. So I could read them, they're all so good, but I really love his kaupapa. There are many Te Reo Māori words and concepts for neurodivergence, especially because of the differences between whānau hapu and iwi. For example, another word for autism is kura urupare, which means gift, treasure in or around your head. A And the word kura on its own also means learning or to be educated. So in New Zealand we have kura, like kura kaupapa. Kura is a school, like a Māori school. However, the most popular word by far and away, the one that I hear even in Europe, is takiwātanga, and that's being used in mainstream Aotearoa New Zealand. Takiwātanga means there's no gendered language in Māori, so they don't say like his or her something, and so that's why it's got like in his/her/their own time, because it doesn't, because English has the gendered language, it doesn't translate to Māori. In his, her or their own time and space. Recognising autism as a natural way of being and not a deficit. Some people also consider the word takiwātanga to be a translation of the word autism, as demonstrated by the entry in our New Zealand Sign Language Dictionary on the screen. I'm not one of those people, but we could argue about that for a long time if we're among people who know lots about this. Takiwātanga has been criticised for being a recent invention, developed in the late 2010s as part of a project to give te reo Māori words to the disability, mental health and addictions workforce led by Kiri Opai Sky here, who is neurotypical. And although the rapid adoption of its use in Aotearoa New Zealand indicates the significance and usefulness of the term for many. So yeah, it's a bit of a thing, like this neurotypical guy came up with this word about autism. But anyway, that's just a side note. The idea of autism is also recent in the Western society, with Kanner syndrome being first constructed in the early 1940s, leading to the triad of impairments in the social communication and activity domains. Asperger's syndrome was dreamed up in the early 90s, with autism spectrum disorder taking centre stage in the 2000s. What I'm trying to say is the way we think about our group of people moves with the times, and we can continue that trajectory. Looking back to pre-colonial ideas can help us move forward, and looking across to our Indigenous sisters, brothers and non-binary kin is only going to bode well. The word combination takiwātanga is new, but the words themselves are not new. As Dr. Pūroto Ngāroko, I hope I said that right, explained, taki means to follow and be guided by the cultural narratives of our ancestors, to be able to seek out their wisdom to guide us and lead us. Takina means to recite. Wa means the dimensions, time, place and space, recognising that everything we do is connected holistically. Tanga is a suffix that makes a verb into a noun, and tangata means people. For Ngāropo, takiwātanga is the norm. It is normal in Te Ao Māori, particularly in pre-colonial times, for spiritual and ancestral expressions to come through people on the physical plane. These expressions could take the form of unique movements and mannerisms. The pathologisation of autism is part of colonisation, as it reflects disconnection from the spiritual, ancestral, environmental and afterlife worlds. People with features associated with what we call autism were considered messengers with baskets of knowledge in the past. Māori traditionally had an oral culture, with print literacy also coming from England. So people with giftings in the areas of remembering and recitation, reciting this, were highly prized. Some of these people would now be called autistic. I want to predict some questioning around the social model of disability. The social model of disability is an improvement on the medical model. However, they come from the same cultural framing. And the underlying premises that disability is related to impairment. In the medical model, disability is caused by an impairment. In the social model, it is caused by the interaction between environmental and relational barriers and a person with impairment. So impairment is the common denominator in both of those models. These ideas both conflict with Māori understandings of disability. In Māori culture, what Pākehā call disability is ordinary, while what Māori call disability is related to colonisation. There are two streams of thinking about this. The experience of colonisation itself as disabling, for example, dislocation from whānau or whenua, whenua's land, as a disability, or the consequences of colonisation on Māori health as disabling. For example, Māori are subjected to higher rates of incarceration, and the removal of their children have caused Māori to become disproportionately impaired. I'll probably read the screen out. So this is from our Māori cultural advisor at IHC where I work, Te Aotearoa Ryan, and she said to me when I was doing my PhD, she said, everyone is a rangatira, which means chief. It doesn't matter if you have a disability. We have that korowai. So korowai is like a cloak made out of kiwi, traditionally made out of kiwi feathers. And the feathers are very rare, and then they take a long time to stitch together. So to wear the cloak is like, for a very special occasion, like a graduation or a wedding or something like that. And often, more for people who, like this is the, look at this person. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you have disability or not. We have that, they would wear that same cloak. So that for me was really powerful. This is Juana Hiki, who's the lead author of the Whānau Hoa model, and she went to the same university as me, and one time I got a book out the library and she'd written in it, and I was like, but anyway, so the Whānau Hoa model is another model of disability that she came up with, and it's about Māori who are part of the family and who are uniquely different. And so it really, ties back to that whole whakapapa, or family lineage is the central, most important thing. Yeah, I'll talk about this. There is a movement in Aotearoa for people to identify as disabled to express their discontent with colonisation, current politics, or dominant thinking. So it's interesting this comes back to your talk about disclosure. As Māori Chinese creative Kim Anderson said, it is to do with collective care and looking after ourselves and others and ourselves in the future. It's one of those identities that anyone can identify with. The fusion of old and new thinking about disability has required new words to describe ways of being that depart from ideas revolving around diagnosis and impairment. The word we are talking about today is takiwātanga. There are many perspectives on takiwātanga, such as cultural, personal, emotional, and spiritual. Jess Hita says, when we view takiwātanga from a te ao Māori perspective, we understand that our taonga whai takiwātanga see and interact with the world differently, operating on their own rhythm and frequency. So to explain the words in that quote, te ao is the Māori world, and taonga means treasure. So when Jess is saying taonga, she's meaning her takiwātanga child. I personally don't identify with takiwātanga myself because I feel that as Pākehā, adopting the term could risk cultural appropriation. Plus, I already hold my autistic identity in a positive regard. However, I do think it is beneficial for non-Māori to think about Māori philosophies and learn from their wisdom. I appreciate the work of takiwātanga advocates in making neurodiversity more accepted in mainstream Aotearoa New Zealand, and for bringing understanding and awareness to our ways of being. So I asked other Pākehā what takiwātanga means to them on social media, and answers included, it's far more positive, I love how it is not seen as a problem or a disorder, but simply as just a way to be. I see how it accurately fits for me, my son and grandson without deficit-based framing. It makes such a difference to have a neutral term rather than autism spectrum in quotes disorder. Neutrality allows acknowledgement of the positives along with the challenges rather than just one or the other, and there's more room for differences and experiences. And just to take one sentence from here, I really like the concept of takiwātanga because it is very strength-based and also very whānau-based. Takiwātanga presents a powerful counter-narrative to deficit-based views of autism. It acknowledges different ways of thinking about being different and is a vehicle for autistic people to challenge assumptions about our lives. There is an overlap in this Venn diagram because it is not an either-or situation. Many Māori in New Zealand still get autism spectrum disorder diagnosis because that is how our government apportions services and support. We can similarly borrow elements as long as they're respectful and accountable to those who opened the way to this journey. We can conclude that takiwātanga is empowering and uplifting. While I understand the privileges an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis has brought into my life, the criteria are not framed in a positive regard. ASD is underpinned by the Western worldview, which conceptualises disability as a lack of ability. And takiwātanga is underpinned by the Māori worldview. ASD is a label and takiwātanga is a description. As soon as we start talking about disorders, people become separated from the norm. But the impact of takiwātanga on autistic pride in Aotearoa New Zealand is to include us in changing what normal is. Autistic advocate David Gray Hammond describes the neurodiversity movement as a liminal point between autistic pathologization and a future state in which we are treated as equals, seen as a fact of life, and not something to be fixed. Takiwātanga is another liminal point to the same destination. Thanks, that's my speech.